In the evening, the fiery red sun smeared the whole world with a faint sunset glow. The tree-lined path leading to the gate of the Shenzhen Hong Kong University campus suddenly became lively, and the students who finally made it to school were looking forward to the most anticipated time of the day. Everyone gathered in groups of 3 or 5. Let's talk, laugh and play together, it's so lively. The end of the boulevard leads directly to the office building. As the place where the school leaders work, the area near the office building is obviously much quieter than the rest of the campus. There is a faint sense of seriousness here. The students subconsciously marked this area as a forbidden area for daily activities. If it was not necessary, they would definitely not approach it easily. But today is an exception. A considerable number of people always deliberately stop when they pass by the gate of the office building, and some even take a sneak peek inside. Everyone seems to be waiting for something. But judging from their expressions, perhaps they were more interested in joining in the fun and gossip. Sure enough, not long after, a tall, thin young man in his early 20s walked out of the office building. He looks quite upright, but those small eyes are too, and a little too obscene, and he also deliberately keeps a small stubble of goatee on his chin. Not only does the overall image suddenly drop by 1, the grade also made him look a little ruffian. Obviously he can't be a teacher. Murderous. As soon as the little young man appeared, the people who were originally surrounding the gate all took a step back. No one spoke. The corner of the young man's mouth was slightly upturned, and he squinted and scanned the surroundings lightly. He hummed disdainfully, and strode down the steps. Wherever he went, pedestrians gave way, ghosts and spirits retreated, and even some teachers who occasionally passed by consciously dodged to both sides. Prestige is prestige, but his back in the middle of the tree-lined path has an indescribable loneliness. After a long while, the crowd behind him slowly came to life when the young man walked away. It turns out that he is Xiaojian, and he still has a beard. Sure enough, there is, enough, cheap. I heard that he was fired. Is there any such thing? It goes without saying, molesting female classmates, molesting female teachers, ignoring school discipline, peeking at girls' baths. I heard that a few days ago he even crippled the captain of the school's picket team. It's not that serious. I lied to you, what a small machine. What's the matter? I've seen him disliked a long time ago. A few days ago, this guy came to our class to tease our class. No way. Why not? This kid molested Nana last week, making Nana howl in the bedroom for a long time. Fuck, it's really good, even Sister Na dares to molest her. Xiaojian, the homonym is cheap. Although Xiaojian was quite dissatisfied with this name, he struggled with it for several years, but there was nothing he could do. Who let his deceased parents choose this name? Fortunately, he shouted and shouted later, and after a long time, he gradually got used to it. And speaking of it, the name Xiaojian was taken on him, and it really had a certain meaning in it. Of course, he would never admit it himself. In fact, it's nothing, it's just that Xiaojian is a little greasy and thick-skinned on weekdays, and he treats people with others, especially the kind of women who are long, beautiful, plump, and have a big butt. A beautiful girl or a beautiful female teacher to talk about life and ideals. No way. Who made Xiaojian's last wish of his deceased parents in Xiaojian's memory is to hold more grandchildren. This son can't be filial, so he can only work harder in this regard and complete it as soon as possible. This great last wish of them, so that they can rest in peace. It's a pity that the current woman. It's so subtle and realistic. So quite unable to understand his ambition and enthusiasm. So far, Xiaojiandu has not been able to successfully complete this arduous task. And the reason why I was fired this time. The reason was that when a boy forced a girl to talk about his ideals in life, he wanted to take the opportunity to play a hero to save the beauty, and then hold the beauty back, but who would have thought, the beauty was saved, as for the hero, only blame him for being too heavy, and the old man in the unfortunate family is a certain vice president of the school. After leaving the office building, Xiaojian walked slowly and leisurely along the tree-lined path towards the school gate. Xiaojian naturally knew what the people behind him were pointing at. In fact, he could have explained it today. But when I think of last night, when that girl came to look for her, her tears were so pitiful. Ugh! Drop out, drop out! Looking back, in fact, no matter if you explain it or not, the final result is probably the same. This is all character. As a human being, it's good to have a clear conscience. Anyway, he has seen it through, and he doesn't expect to rely on this diploma to make a living. This is thanks to his parents for leaving early, and by the way, thanks to the two elders for giving him a good name, life, starve the timid, and support the daring. Tomorrow, he won't belong here. Let's take advantage of this last moment to take a good look at this place where he has lived for 3 years. But no matter how slow you go, the road will always end. In front of you is the gate of the school. If you walk out of this gate, maybe you will never want to come back. Xiaojian. When passing by the school post office, someone suddenly called him. Alas, his name is so awkward. When others call it awkward, it sounds even more awkward to me. Xiaojian turned around. It was the girl from yesterday, standing cautiously 10 meters away from him. What's up? Yes, you, with your package. The girl blushed, ran over, handed a book-sized envelope to Xiaojian, ran back immediately, and disappeared behind the door of the Post and Telecommunications office in a blink of an eye. Xiaojian suddenly understood. He was still wondering a few days ago. When he rescued her that day, he always thought she was a little familiar. It turned out to be part-time work and part-time in the school Post and Telecommunications office. Let's work. It's just that I feel sorry for myself for being a good person in vain, and I didn't even get a thank you. Shaking his head mockingly, Xiaojian looked at the package in his hand. The recipient is really Xiaojian. Thinking about it, there should be no mistake. After all, the name is too strange. It's just that even if he wants to break his head, he really can't think of anyone who will send him a package. Hey! It's really wicked, the sender and sender's address are empty there. Take a closer look, there is no postmark. Wouldn't someone be pranking him? Xiaojian kept his mind, squinted and scanned the surroundings. No matter how he looked at it, it was mysterious. I was afraid that there was a group of idle and annoying guys in a corner, carrying a camera, waiting to see him. Make a fool of yourself. Female horse, we won't let you do as you wish. Holding the package upside down in his hands, Xiaojian swaggered out of the school. After leaving the school, Xiaojian quickly entered a small alley. What is the most prosperous business near the university? That's right, it's a rental house. Annual rent, monthly rent, daily rent, no matter what grade it is, even if you rent it on time, you will keep it full every night. Today's college students, they are really good at learning. Especially for the study of the course of the fusion of body and soul, the energy is simply impatient and tireless. Xiaojian rented a small house in this alley. When he entered the door, he didn't forget to look behind him, but he didn't find anyone following him. Maybe the pranksters gave up. After closing the door, Xiaojian walked down the stairwell. This 10-square-meter basement is his kennel. Of course, the reason why he rented here is definitely not for the convenience of studying physiological science, but because of money. It is cheap here, although the conditions are a little worse, but after a semester, the rent is only one-third of the dormitory. The furnishings in the basement are very simple: a bed, a box, a computer desk and a computer on the computer desk. The bed is for rest, the box is for salute, and as for the computer, hung is the other half of Xiaojian's life. Sitting on the bed, Xiaojian picked up the package and looked at it carefully. It was soft inside, so there shouldn't be any hidden mechanism. Xiaojian thought about it for a while, and decided to tear it apart and have a look. In fact, the inside of the package is far less full than it looks from the outside. After tearing layer after layer, the volume shrunk to half the size of a palm, but I still haven't seen anything real. However, just when Xiaojian decided that this was a prank made by some boring guy and was about to give up, he suddenly found two little black things in a pile of torn wrapping papers scattered on the bed. One of them is easily recognizable. It is a memory card the size of the tip of a thumb. www.mtlnovel.com. The other is a pendant. This pendant has a dark body and is only the size of a coin. The material is a bit like a stone, but also a bit like some kind of metal. It is placed under the fluorescent lamp, and the appearance of the pendant exudes a faint and restrained halo. On the front of the pendant, some simple and mysterious symbols are engraved. The lines of these symbols are rough and simple, open and closed, but they are natural. On the back, a majestic and domineering creature is drawn to life by simple singular strokes. Yes, dragon, a dragon totem in ancient times. Looking at the two little things on the palm of his hand, Xiaojian was confused. Could it be that someone really sent something to him? Regardless, let's take a look at the memory card first. Xiaojian finally found the card reader in a pile of dirty clothes after a lot of hard work. Turn on the computer and read the data. Damn it, you actually ask for a password. The result is very speechless. Xiaojian's hair is very short and his knowledge is shorter. He knows about file encryption, but he has never seen a memory card that requires a password to even click to enter. God horse stuff? High tech? I still don't believe in this evil. Originally wanted to play brute force cracking, but Xiaojian thought about it and suddenly felt that this matter should not be so simple. Even if someone played a prank, he would not send himself a pendant. If the recipient is not mistaken, the password must be known by himself. With the thought of trying it out, Xiaojian typed in his birthday on the dialog box. Mistake. After thinking about it, Xiaojian reluctantly typed in a series of numbers that he was very reluctant to remember, but he couldn't forget the anniversary of his parents' death. In fact, Xiaojian has almost thought of who will send him a package. It's just that he is still a little suspicious after all. This thing is too weird, too unthinkable. It's like someone suddenly told him that the sun will come out from the west tomorrow. He typed in that set of numbers that he would never forget. The computer interface flashed, the password was correct, and the computer directly entered the memory card access interface. Xiaojian looked at the contents of the memory card. There were two files inside, one of which was an installation program, and a text document. Move the mouse, put it on the text document, a file name will be displayed. My dear Baihang brother will personally open it. Must hang up. Xiaojian's nickname originated from when Xiaojian was in elementary school. Every time Xiaojian took an exam, Keek had to hang up. At that time, his old head teacher was more literary and thought it was a bit indecent to call Xiaojian's name directly. So give it the nickname Xiaobihang. Damn it, it really is this guy. Looking at the title at the beginning of the first line of the document, Xiaojian was finally sure who the guy who sent him the package was. His cheap brother Xiaoyu. An extremely irresponsible man who is not a man. At least in Xiaojian's opinion. Since his brother and his parents died, the two brothers have lived together for another 5 years. Although the conditions were a little more difficult, Xiaojian felt very fulfilled during that time. However, when he was 10 years old, he was 10 years older than him. The old cheap brother thought he was too annoying. He quit the job, left a small living allowance, and went to his flowery world alone. In the blink of an eye, 10 years have passed. I didn't expect that my cheap brother would even think of sending me something. Thinking of this, Xiaojian suddenly became interested. I don't know what this guy wrote to me. Double-click the document to open. Xiaojian, hello. Your brother is now free from illness and pain, and is living a good life. It is estimated that he will not go to in the short term. For this, I am very sorry for your brother. I will disappoint you. I'm looking for you this time because I want to communicate with you about something. Of course, you can also think I'm farting. But for the sake of your own life, I advise you to read the following content carefully and seriously. Seeing this, Xiaojian couldn't help but smile. He didn't expect that it had been 10 years, and his cheap old brother still had such a personality. I sent you 3 small things in the package. 3 item? Seeing this, Xiaojian was confused. He clearly only saw 2 things. Why did it say there were 3? Continue to look down. Memory card. Jade pendant. He glanced at the carving in the palm of his hand. Could it be that this black charcoal head is made of jade? Xiaojian was extremely suspicious. The last thing is an emulator. Simulator? Magical stuff? Why didn't I see it? It seemed that something was leaking. Xiaojian went back to the bed and flipped through the pile of waste paper. After a lot of hard work, he finally found a transparent, very thin sheet of crystal that was only the size of a contact lens on a newspaper for packaging. However, his intuition told him that this crystal piece of 4 methods should be the so-called simulator. After getting the things, Xiaojian sat back on the computer desk, moved the mouse, and continued to scroll down. Don't underestimate these 3 little things, you kid, they were all acquired by Lao Tzu's hard work, and they are directly related to your kid's happiness in the rest of his life. Okay, no nonsense, let's get down to business. First of all, you put a little blood from yourself on the simulator, which is the crystal piece, don't get confused. After the blood on the simulator is dry, you can look for the jade pendant. There is a small slot in the dragon's tail, and you insert the simulator into it. Next, you find a rope, hang the jade pendant around your neck, and keep it well, don't ask why, just don't forget Lao Tzu when your kid will benefit in the future. Now let me tell you 3 things. The first item, I put some gadgets in the basement at number 804, Dongfeng Road, Baiyun District, Shenzhen. When you are desperate one day, you can go and have a look. Maybe there are some things in it that you can use. The second thing, I know that your kid has a very dark conscience, don't curse me, it's a fact, and what I want to tell you is that you can be more dark and selfish in the future. I'm very optimistic about you on this. The third item, there is a small game in the memory card. It is good for you to play more when you have time. Okay. That's all. Don't miss me. Take care. After reading the contents of the document in one breath, Xiaojian was even more confused. That cheap old brother of mine is just like this, doing things without end or beginning, or else he wouldn't have sneaked away alone. But do you listen to him? After thinking about it, Xiaojian felt that his brother, although his character was a little worse, and the relationship between the two was very weak, but he would not be so hurt that he sent a package to himself so far to find his own happiness. And no matter how outrageous it is, the big deal is the loss of a drop of blood. Say it and do it. After painting the simulator with blood, Xiaojian carefully searched for the jade pendant. He found a small slot on the side of the dragon's tail in the direction of the tail. Inserting the simulator into the slot, Xiaojian found another chain to lift it up, and then hung it around his neck. After completing this series of actions, Xiaojian opened the installer on the memory card again. What follows is a long wait. 30 minutes later, the program was finally installed. www.mtlnovel.com. Double-click the icon to run the program. But when Xiaojian saw the familiar interface on the computer interface, he almost dropped his head on the computer desk. Legend! 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 Xiaojian stared blankly at the screen, his whole body was dumbfounded, and his mind suddenly had a tendency to crash. What was displayed on the screen was the character selection interface of the game Blood Legend, which was once all the rage, and Xiaojian was so familiar with it that he could no longer be familiar with it. And it's a single-player version. In order to prevent this interface from being just someone's boring spoof, Xiaojian still created a character to go in and have a look. Unfortunately, he was destined to be disappointed. Familiar pictures, Familiar characters, familiar. I rely on, the following 800 words are omitted. Xiaojian was completely speechless. He had to accept a cruel fact: he was tricked by his cheap brother who disappeared for more than 10 years. Xiaojian was instantly enraged. He yanked the jade pendant off, and he raised his hand to throw it out, but at the last moment, some vague memories suddenly appeared in his mind. It seemed, vaguely, that he remembered his cheap old brother, who seemed to be an iron and steel fan of the game Legend of Blood at the beginning. Will things be in the game? Or, let's play and see. In fact, Xiaojian himself is also very fascinated by the game Legend, but it was many years ago. Anyway, I have dropped out of school now, and I am fine when I am idle. Xiaojian hastily created a Taoist priest and dived into the game. Maybe it's a bit of self-imposed exile in it. After receiving this legendary private server sent by my brother, Xiaojian can be said to have completely fallen. Classics are always memorable. In this version of the private server, a lot of interesting new elements have been added, such as new skills, new maps, new monsters, and so on. Moreover, the equipment attributes and occupation balance in the game are well controlled, which not only increases the fun of the game, but also does not make people feel abnormal. What's more amazing is that as soon as Xiaojian went online, he was surprised to find that this private server was not a standalone version, and the online rate was still very high at the same time. The combination of these series of factors resulted in the direct consequence that Xiaojian spent the next few days day and night, sleepless nights, and engrossed himself in the game, to the point of becoming obsessed. And this state of affairs has continued. When I'm hungry, I just use a few breads to cope with it. When I was sleepy, I leaned on the chair and squinted for a while. The most exaggerated one, he was brushing an old monster. He squinted a little, only to find out that 3 hours had passed when he opened his eyes again. Even if an annoying news window or two occasionally popped up in the lower right corner of the computer, he was extremely annoyed and closed it off. But Xiaojian didn't know that during the period when he was addicted to the game world, the world outside was undergoing earth-shaking changes. Of course, even if someone told him that the sky would fall tomorrow, he wouldn't care. Playing in the dark for 3 days and 3 nights. On the morning of the 4th day, Xiaojian finally felt a little tired, so he staggered up from the chair, stretched comfortably, and looked at the time below the computer screen. December 2015 25th, 12 o'clock. Well, it's time to go out for a walk. Xiaojian planned to go out for a walk and combine work and rest. However, just when he took a shower and was about to go out, boom! A muffled sound came from outside. Xiaojian Zheng was surprised. He found that the fluorescent lights in the room were flickering, and then getting brighter and brighter. Then, even the computer that had been turned off suddenly began to emit blue smoke. This discovery completely drove Xiaojian crazy, knowing that the computer can always be equal to his other half. Fuck! Xiaojian fiercely let out an angry shout, and rushed over to turn on the power supply. But at this moment, sparks appeared, and the room suddenly turned from extremely bright to pitch black. The fluorescent lamps that were so bright finally couldn't bear the load. The next second, Xiaojian suddenly felt a destructive force suddenly rolling over from all directions, frantically wreaking havoc in the narrow space of the basement. Xiaojian only felt the earth shake for a while, and the boom rumble exploded in his mind, and everything in his field of vision was shaking violently. Earthquake! This thought just came up in his mind. Xiaojian's eyes suddenly went dark, and he instantly lost consciousness. AD 2015, December 22. A huge explosion occurred in Feiyun building in Shenzhen, Hong Kong City, Huiguo. The explosion caused hundreds of deaths and the entire Feiyun building collapsed. In this attack, the deranged terrorists were suspected to have used poison gas bombs. With the spread of dust after the explosion, people near the explosion site showed a large number of patients with symptoms of poisoning such as vomiting, syncope, convulsions, bloodthirsty, and excitement. After sampling, these patients were confirmed to be infected with an unknown malignant virus, X virus, similar to a variant of rabies virus. The virus has no incubation period and has a very high incidence rate. It can be transmitted through blood, air, etc. 3 hours later, the variant virus spread to the entire Shenzhen, Hong Kong city. 10 hours later, Shenzhen and Hong Kong were quarantined. AD 2015, December 23, 7 o'clock a.m. Following the terrorist attack in Shenzhen and Hong Kong, Beijing, New York, Tokyo, Paris, London, and other major cities in the world all experienced huge explosions at the same time, and patients infected with X virus were successively found in the explosion sites of these cities. An hour later, the virus began to spread, and there was no effective way to prevent its infection. 5 hours later, the virus began to spread globally. AD 2015, December 24. The number of people infected with the virus worldwide has reached 100 million. On the same day, the first batch of infected people in Shenzhen and Hong Kong began to die in large numbers. 2015 AD, December 25. The number of infected patients soared to 2 billion. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the Chinese government announced that it has found a way to inhibit the spread of the virus. It has been confirmed that in the environment of nuclear radiation, the activity of the X virus will be reduced, and it will no longer have the characteristics of air transmission. And after intense discussions, the Chinese government decided to conduct an air explosion test of a small-yield nuclear bomb in the Shenzhen-Hong Kong area where the X virus first broke out. The time for the release of the nuclear bomb was impressive: December 25, exactly 12 o'clock noon. 1 day later, mankind entered the era of great destruction. The sun is like blood. www.mtlnovel.com. The cold snap is raging. In the blink of an eye, more than a month has passed since the Chinese government carried out a nuclear air explosion in Shenzhen and Hong Kong. On that day, although the governments of various countries carefully controlled the power of the nuclear bomb explosion when carrying out nuclear air explosions, the global nuclear explosion still caused irreversible and serious damage to the ecological environment on the Earth and human civilization. The most obvious of these is the extra nuclear fallout in the atmosphere. These nuclear fallout not only weakened and reflected the intensity of the sun's rays, but also changed the color of its spectrum, that is, from that day on, the golden sun officially became the past tense, replaced by red, thick as blood red sunlight. What followed was a global cooling. The surviving humans had to reduce the time of outdoor activities, and the plants, as if injected with growth-promoting hormones, grew wildly. The lush, huge jungle of giant trees, densely packed with tenacious vines like dragons, moss, and weeds that are ubiquitous and pervasive, have become the main theme of this world. And the city that symbolizes human civilization, now there is only a piece of ruins left in the jungle and grass. In a corner of Shenzhen, Hong Kong City, the green belt on both sides of the main trunk is full of waist-high weeds, and on both sides are those street-facing buildings riddled with holes and dilapidated, and the streets are covered with thick glass and concrete fragments. Occasionally you can see a small car parked on the street at will. Some of them are still new, but most of the cars are covered with thick dust on the roof, and some of the cars have naughty green on the chassis. Vine. Dead bones, ruins, giant trees, jungle. The desolation after the disaster and the gloomy greenness representing vitality are intertwined, contradicting each other, but coexisting with each other. There is a trace of tranquility in the barren. A gust of breeze blew, gently bending the weeds on both sides of the street, and the blades of grass collided and rubbed each other, making a soft and pleasant rustling sound. Crack! Suddenly, there was a crisp sound in the grass. It was the sound of the sole of the shoe rubbing against the sand. It was very light, and if you were not careful, it would be ignored. Immediately afterwards, a small group of lush grass in the corner suddenly separated from the middle, and the next second, a black figure rushed out of the grass, and he saw him with a cat on his waist, using all four limbs, and nimbly walking around. In the dark corner of the building, in the blink of an eye, I got under the chassis of a car parked 10 meters away. Zhao Jun is tall, thin, and a little handsome. He used to have a good career as a lawyer. Of course, that was a month ago. Now there is not even a complete building in the whole city, and there is not even a single person who dares to take to the streets. Without the police, without the court, naturally there will be no more. Who would be fed up and go to a lawyer to file a lawsuit? It might be a little extreme to say that. In fact, there are still police officers, but most of the police uncles have stopped catching bad guys. They have all changed their professions to be beggars, busy crawling through the rubble, busy looking for food. It is said that 2 weeks ago, there was an army in the city. They tried to circle a place in the city center and set up a base to restore the so-called order. But later on, Zhao Jun didn't know whether this happened or not. Anyway, he never saw anyone talk about this army again. Maybe it's all gone. Then after another week or so, by chance, he heard that the who were entrenched in the city center suddenly had a lot of weapons. Ugh! Doomsday! Sometimes Zhao Jun thinks that human beings are really cheap, and he always likes to push himself to a dead end. Hey, why is there an alley here? Zhao Jun frowned slightly, squinting and staring at the place more than 10 meters in front of him. There, between the two collapsed buildings, there was an alley about 1 meter wide. Since this street is within the scope of a university town, there are a lot of small shops selling snacks on the street. Since the explosion, Zhao Jun has searched back and forth on this street no less than 10 times. He remembered every grass and tree, every building, every lamp post, where every corner led, but this was the first time he saw this alley. Okay. After carefully recalling it for a while, Zhao Jun suddenly understood, and his frowning brows relaxed. He remembered that yesterday, there was a signboard for Lanzhou Ramen. I think it was windy today. The face sign was blown away. Would you like to go in and have a look? In fact, this choice was a good decision. It has been a long time since the explosion. As long as you can find food and use it on the whole street, it has long been taken away. According to the plan, Zhao Jun originally planned to go 2 kilometers away today. Supermarkets try their luck. Of course there is a lot of food in the supermarket, but there are also many dangers. If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't find food, Zhao Jun would never venture there. Crack! Suddenly, there was a crisp sound in the distance. Zhao Jun was lying on the bottom of the car, squinting to look over, only to see the rickety shadow that had been swaying under the house at a 45-degree angle to his left, and finally slowly walked into the shadow of the stairwell. That's the Dark Chaser. The apocalypse is bad, but for the survivors who survived, that's not all. Dark Chaser. Mutant creatures. These two creatures are the biggest threat to the survival of the survivors. In the first period after the nuclear explosion, nuclear radiation did successfully suppress the spread of the X virus. This is a bit nonsense. If it doesn't work, no one will be stupid enough to throw a nuclear warhead on their head. At the same time, nuclear radiation also prevents the death of patients infected with the X virus. However, just when everyone was relieved, they didn't know that the real disaster had just begun. Because there is no effective treatment, over time, 99% of virus-infected patients have more severe symptoms, and they gradually evolve into monsters that bite when they see it. What's even more terrifying is that the virus has greatly improved their physical fitness, so that they can run as fast as Bolt, beat people, and bite people more violently than Tyson, who started mad. Fortunately, these monsters have a weakness: they are afraid of light. Just afraid, the light cannot cause effective damage to them. This is also the origin of their name as Dark Chaser. Of course, sometimes Zhao Jun also thinks that this disaster may not be all bad for mankind. At least the mutated X virus not only brought nightmares to mankind, but also brought hope to some people who persisted. For example, Zhao Jun himself, after more than a month of tempering, his speed has already increased. A very obvious improvement. Now that Bolt is standing in front of him, he dares to challenge, compared to the previous one. It's now. The dark chaser finally disappeared completely. Seeing the opportunity, Zhao Jun suddenly exerted force on his limbs and slammed on the ground. In the next second, he seemed to have transformed into a cheetah, and flew out close to the ground, with a puff of dust and smoke, plunged his head into 10. In the alley outside Mikai. It's all a rental house. 5 minutes later, Zhao Jun, who was walking around the alley, reluctantly came to such a conclusion. Why do you say helpless? Just because there is too little oil and water in the rental house, the oil and water naturally refers to food. This is a university town, who would rent a house in a university town? Don't think about it, all fools know this, it must be those hungry young men and women who are counting on these people to store a lot of food in the room. It is better to expect the sow to climb trees. However, talking is better than nothing. Zhao Jun still rummaged through the rubble. No matter how bad it was, I believe a few packs of instant noodles should still be a bit. And since most of the houses in this alley are private houses, the quality of private houses is poor, there are many bean curd projects, especially the ones rented to others, the walls are all wooden, under the aftermath of the nuclear explosion, the intact 10 if there is no one, since they are all collapsed, there will naturally be fewer places to hide people, which will reduce the probability of a dark chaser suddenly appearing in a corner. What? When opening an iron door, Zhao Jun suddenly found a basement passage, which made him feel a little excited. An undiscovered basement. www.mtlnovel.com means that there may be food, and more importantly, if the structure of this basement is well preserved, it means that Zhao Jun will have a new hiding place. Location: his search for food can also be larger. But before that, he must confirm the safety of this basement. The iron door was locked, but it was obviously not difficult for Zhao Jun. The space in the basement is not very large, only about 10 square meters, but the structure is well preserved. There is a bed and a computer desk in the corner. It only needs to be tidied up a little, and it is a very perfect hiding place. Okay. Suddenly, Zhao Jun's body trembled violently, and he found a corpse beside the bed. Corpse? No, 99% of patients infected with X virus will become shadow chasers, and under the condition of extreme lack of food, shadow chasers will enter a state similar to hibernation. Slowly pulling out a homemade iron spear from behind, Zhao Jun walked over on tiptoe. The corpse on the ground is a young man. There is no obvious injury to his body. If there is no accident, it can basically be confirmed that it has transformed into a dark chaser. But fortunately this dark chaser hasn't woken up yet. With a hint of luck, Zhao Jun folded his hands, clenched the iron spear, and stared at the head of the dark chaser. The tip of the spear was compared up and down. The only way to kill the dark chaser quickly was to attack them. Head, smash it, smash it. At this moment, as if feeling the danger, the dark chaser's eyes suddenly opened. Zhao Jun let out a low roar, his hands suddenly exerted force, and the iron spear, carrying a wisp of afterimage, aimed at the dark chaser and plunged into the head. Clang! In a daze, Xiaojian vaguely heard someone prying at his door. There are thieves. This was the first thought in Xiaojian's mind after waking up. I tried to struggle for a while, but unfortunately my body was a little bit inflexible, but I had no choice but to let out a roar to warn the thief that someone was in the room, but unfortunately my throat was dry, and I didn't see a single sound after opening for a long time. At this time, the iron door of the room was pried open, and a tall, thin figure walked in through the door. In order to protect himself, Xiaojian had to continue to pretend to be stunned. There is no way, who made himself a wounded number to be slaughtered by others, and if a thief is in a hurry and kills him, it would be a real loss. Xiaojian's current thinking is still stuck in the first second before he fell into a coma. He vaguely remembers that there seemed to be an earthquake, and his computer seemed to be on fire. Then, he was smashed by something and passed out. Now Xiaojian doesn't know that it's the end of the world, and he is still thinking secretly, in fact, it's no big deal to faint, just like sleeping, squinting, opening, and suddenly it's over, but after that, my head is a little swollen, and my body doesn't quite obey for the time being. After judging the location of the thief a little, Xiaojian took the opportunity to squinted and glanced at the computer not far away, and felt a pain in his heart for no reason. Can't keep it. He turned his head and observed the thief for a while. Seeing his clumsy appearance, Xiaojian secretly worried for him. Please be professional, get your things and get out of here. And what makes Xiaojian speechless is that the thief seems to have a problem with his brain. He doesn't touch the valuable things that are clearly in front of him. Instead, he goes to the packaging bag he put in the corner. If there are any ghosts there, just a few bags eat leftover expired bread by yourself. It's a pity that Xiaojian's contempt, the thief has no way of knowing. Now he is finding 2 pieces of moldy bread for himself. Oops! Xiaojian suddenly found that the thief was looking at him, and hurriedly closed his eyes. Cha! The sole of the shoe is on the ground, and the sound is getting closer. What are you doing here? Why don't you get out of here? Xiaojian was secretly anxious, but on the surface he still pretended to be unconscious, but his wish was doomed to fail. Tread! The thief stood beside Xiaojian's head. Damn it, this guy doesn't want to kill people. At this moment, Xiaojian suddenly heard a faint sound in his ears. Judging from the sound, it was because the thief pulled something out of his clothes. Following that, Xiaojian noticed that the thief's breathing suddenly increased. Not good. Xiaojian was startled and suddenly opened his eyes. Looking at the tip of the spear that was rapidly expanding in his pupils, in that second, Xiaojian even suspected that he had smelled the breath of death. The extreme sense of crisis caused his pupils to shrink to the size of needles in an instant. Human beings instinctively resist when faced with death. Under the oppression of the idea of survival, they swelled wildly and violently. Roar! A roar erupted from his throat. Xiaojian's eyes were about to split, his hands suddenly folded together, and at the last 0.01 seconds, he was able to grab the iron spear that was only a millimeter away from his eyes. Go to hell! The thief suddenly burst into a drink, drew his spear, and stabbed again. Facing the dark chaser who suddenly woke up, Zhao Jun's soul flew out of the sky, and the strength of the dark chaser could be called a pervert. Zhao Jun knew that in such a narrow and closed environment, his chance of escaping now was infinitely close to 0. If he wants to live, Zhao Jun has only one choice now: kill him. As for Xiaojian, now this kid is completely stunned, and there is only one thought in his mind: to live. How to survive? Xiaojian is naturally not stupid enough to think that he can reason with a thief who intends to kill him, and an earthquake has just happened. If this guy killed himself, as long as he throws it in the garbage, who will know? If you want to survive, you must kill him. If Zhao Jun didn't launch a second attack immediately after the first attack failed, if Xiaojian warned or said a word or two to show weakness, things would not develop to the level of life and death. But there has never been a place in this world if. From the very beginning, things fell into a dead end, and the final result was also doomed. Only one of the two was destined to survive. When Zhao Jun once again raised his spear to stab, the small moment of his energy accumulation gave Xiaojian a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I remember when I was very young, Xiaojian already possessed the combat power of an adult. Reason. With no father or mother, in the end, even the only cheap old man he could rely on was left behind. In such a situation, Xiaojian had to learn to fight for food with those beggars, and he had to learn to deal with those in the village who had nothing to do all day. Once, in order not to be sold as a deformed child to make money, www.mtlnovel.com, he used his own teeth to bite the trafficker's throat. Ding! A crisp sound suddenly sounded in the basement. Xiaojian shook his head and avoided the spear that Zhao Jun had risked his life with. The next second, Xiaojian pointed his fingers into a knife, and a hand knife slashed towards Zhao Jun's neck. Crack! Not all human bones are as hard as iron, and our lives are far more fragile than we think. Where Xiaojian's knife fell, Zhao Jun's Adam's apple and esophagus suddenly dented a lot, and at the same time there were broken bones. When it cracked, it made an eerie crisp sound. Clang clang! Zhao Jun stepped back again and again. The iron spear he was holding tightly in his hand had already rolled onto the floor. He covered his neck with one hand and pointed at Xiaojian with the other. His eyes were full of shock and disbelief. Xiaojian hit a carp and bounced up violently. He stared at Zhao Jun, and scolded fiercely, "He's next door to Mela, if you steal something, just steal Dingzi. You even want to kill Lao Tzu to silence him, Lao Tzu." He lowered his head and looked around on the ground, just in time to see the iron spear. "I killed you." Xiaojian picked up the iron spear. "Cuckoo!" Zhao Jun looked at Xiaojian in horror, and waved his hands again and again, as if he wanted to say something, but unfortunately he was hit by a knife in Xiaojian's throat, and for a while he couldn't speak at all. Zhao Jun finally realized that he was wrong. He was wrong from the beginning. He mistakenly regarded Xiaojian as a dark chaser. "Go to hell!" With a grin, Xiaojian stabbed his spear out. Zhao Jun's body quickly softened, his hands were on his side, and his feet were half kneeling on the ground, his whole body seemed to be nailed to the wall. Xiaojian's actions are not ruthless. The tip of the spear penetrated Zhao Jun's left cheek, pierced through the skull, and crushed his brain. It came out of the back of Zhao Jun's head and stabbed the wall. Zhao Jun's mouth was slanted open, and the left half of his face had been pulled by the rough spear body and tucked into the cranial cavity. The left eyeball was pulled out, and the blood was hanging beside his cheek. On the top, some red, white, greasy liquid slowly flowed out, and it was impossible to tell whether it was blood or brains. "I killed someone." Xiaojian let go of his hands and sat on the ground. This is not like killing a chicken, a dog, or a cow when he was in the village on weekdays, but a living person. Xiaojian remembered that he had seen in many novels the descriptions of the reaction after a murder. In his words, those descriptions were simply weak. What vomited upside down, what neurotic madness. Shit. Fear. Xiaojian's only feeling right now is fear, and his field of vision is filled with the corpse on the wall. "My mind is dazed, my mouth is dry, and my ears seem to be deaf, but I can hear the bang bang, bang bang. The heart beat again and again, it feels like the heart will come out of the throat at any time. Pop out. I'm just self-defense." He tried every means to think about some excuses to comfort himself, but all kinds of fearful emotions couldn't stop them from coming out of his mind. "But, will I be too defensive? What if I'm found out, will I be caught and go to jail? Just in case." Xiaojian finally calmed down after thinking about gains and losses for about 10 minutes, after all, he had a similar experience, although the trafficker whose neck was bitten by him did not die in the end, and now he has the fear that was supposed to start has turned into a fear afterward. "What I think about the most is how to avoid being discovered, and be careful about whether I will go to jail." If Xiaojian knew that it was the end of the world, he probably wouldn't be like this. Startled. Of course, it cannot be denied that it may be too one-sided to judge those authors based on Xiaojian's thinking. After all, there are many people in this world who have to cry for a long time to kill a fish. Xiaojian sat on the ground to rest without stopping in his mind, calmly analyzing the current situation. Judging from the situation in this room, the earthquake should be quite severe. It is estimated that there has been a commotion up there. We have to get this body out before the rescue operation starts. There was still a slight pain in the head, Xiaojian thumped it angrily. "Hey, headache, don't worry, go wash your face first." Staggeringly stood up from the ground, patted the dust on his buttocks, Xiaojian supported the wall and walked towards the bathroom. After turning a corner, Xiaojian got into the bathroom. Strange thing, when did this faucet rust? Standing in front of the wash basin, Xiaojian looked at the faucet with some doubts, not knowing whether he remembered it wrong or was confused. Crunch! In the screeching sound of friction, Xiaojian took a lot of effort to get the rusty faucet to be turned off with difficulty. He couldn't wait to grab a handful of water and sprinkle it on his face. But the next second, when Xiaojian saw what was in the palm of his hand, his movements were abrupt, and he froze for a moment. How is it possible? Shock, surprise, panic, doubt, all kinds of emotions came one after another, and the expression on his face changed drastically. What came out of the faucet was not tap water at all. With the sudden sound of hiss, hiss, the cool and clear tap water was not seen, and there were a few sticky clumps of black sludge with a foul smell. It was impatient, and it was ejected from the water outlet like a cannonball out of the chamber. Excluding some human factors and the natural passage of time, under what circumstances would the water pipe that was supposed to flow out tap water flow out of sludge, and it was black sludge with a strong smell of rust? This is a fairly simple question, but for the current Xiaojian, it is a very terrifying question. At least Xiaojian is sure that an earthquake, even if the magnitude of the earthquake soars to the sky and destroys the world, will definitely not occur in such a situation that is contrary to common sense. Compared with this issue, Shenma's corpse, Shenma's imprisonment, these issues are not so important in Xiaojian's view now. Seemingly wanting something, Xiaojian hurriedly took out his mobile phone from his trousers pocket, held it in front of his eyes with both hands trembling, pressed it, but the screen didn't move, and when he pressed it again, he found that the mobile phone had been turned off. I pressed the power switch again, but there was still no response. The bad feeling is getting stronger and stronger. Fuck. The impatient Xiaojian Meng raised his hand, slammed the phone against the wall with a slap, turned around, and rushed out of the basement as if flying. Xiaojian now just wants to figure out one thing: how long has he slept? Or just how long have you been dizzy? But for the time being, Xiaojian should not expect to understand this matter. Rao was fully prepared for the situation outside, but when Xiaojian really rushed out of the door to the corridor leading to the basement, he was still stunned by the situation that appeared in front of him. Compared with the cruel reality, the scene after the earthquake in his imagination at the beginning, and the sad scene of the apocalypse described in some apocalyptic novels and movies, are simply weak. A world. Blood red in the field of vision. Under some kind of terrifying force, the buildings in the residential area of the small alley were like a level 12 tornado passing through, and it could be said that they were flattened. In the distance are huge trees that cover the sky, towering into the clouds, entangled and intertwined, each arm is thick, like old vines wandering among the giant trees like a scorpion. www.mtlnovel.com. As far as you can see, outside where there is still the slightest trace of a modern city, there is only an endless line of sight in the line of sight, just like the emerald green of the ancient primitive jungle. Among the dense weeds and giant trees, occasionally broken walls and grasses are looming. Oh my god! How long have I been dizzy? Xiaojian was completely dumbfounded. His mouth was so open that even if he stuffed an egg into it, there would be no problem. Could it be time travel? Time travel? Not yet despairing, at this moment, Xiaojian thought of countless situations in which this situation might occur. Crack! A weak, brittle sound suddenly sounded under his feet, instantly pulling back his wandering mind. Looking at the direction of the sound like a conditioned reflex, Xiaojian found that he was stepping on a newspaper under his feet. Under the ravages of wind and rain, the handwriting on the newspaper was already blurred, but this did not prevent Xiaojian from clearly seeing the content above. Resident Evil. Mutant rabies virus. Infection. Zombies. The city fell, the military retreated. Nuclear explosion. The end of mankind. Xiaojian stared at the contents of the newspaper. The entire page of the newspaper, the headlines and contents were all filled with these kind of shocking words. He rubbed and rubbed heavily on his eyes. Yes, that's right. Omaka, the end of the world. Xiaojian fiercely let out a wailing of unknown meaning. Right at this moment, a gust of breeze blew gently, and while it was blowing, a tattered newspaper was rolled up behind him and fluttered far away. What kind of natural and man-made disaster happened to make this once prosperous and noisy city become so dilapidated and desolate now? Xiaojian didn't dare to think about it. I don't even want to think about it. Xiaojian only knew that the first problem he had to face right now was to try his best to survive in the ruined jungle that was probably formerly known as Shenzhen, Hong Kong City, as much as possible. Ordinarily, this should be a relatively simple question for Xiaojian, who has lived in no fixed place since he was a child. But the truth is cruel. Xiaojian is now facing a very serious problem. Gulong long. There was a sudden drum in the stomach. Xiaojian couldn't help feeling a colic in his stomach. He was very familiar with this feeling. It was because the stomach was completely empty, and even the supply of stomach acid was seriously insufficient. Of colic. Food. Yes, it's food. Although the current date cannot be determined for the time being, Xiaojian is very clear that he must find something to fill his stomach now, otherwise, let alone survive in this apocalypse, even if he can walk out of this street, it is very successful. Question. After confirming the situation he was facing now, Xiaojian hurriedly returned to the basement and hastily packed up some clothes and supplies. When he looked back and saw the corpse hanging on the wall, Xiaojian couldn't help but feel a little bit of fear and regret. It would be great if this person was still alive, that way he would be able to ask for some useful information. Unfortunately, under the circumstances at that time, he had no choice at all. Ugh! It's a pity that the two moldy breads were all ruined by this guy. Grabbing the iron spear, Xiaojian pulled it off the wall with all his strength. When the rough spear body was pulled out of the skull cavity, blood and brains poured out all of a sudden. With a bang, he fell to the ground, holding the iron spear upside down in his hand. Although the workmanship is a bit rough, the spear tip is very sharp. In this unknown environment, we can only make do with it. After half an hour, Xiaojian, who was ready, returned to the ground again. There are many traces of flipping in the ruins of the ground building, because someone should come here to scrape it, but with Xiaojian's understanding of this area, the probability of finding food should be very, very slim, although slim does not necessarily mean no chance. But he was really hungry, his physical strength was not enough for him to do this. Tisk tisk. Looking at the shop of Gillen rice noodles not far away, Xiaojian swallowed the saliva secreted from his mouth. Do you want to go in and try your luck? Forget it, the black blondin inside, in a blood-red world, is like a big mouth that chooses people to bite. Why are there so many dragging bloodstains at the door? I remember that the newspaper just mentioned about infection and zombies. There are no zombies, right? Does that mean that all the food exposed in the air is infected by the virus, and I can only find packaged food to eat? After thinking about this, Xiaojian couldn't help but feel a little discouraged. Walking down the street, all kinds of magnified plants grow very lush, and I don't know how long it will take to grow to such a large size. It's a pity that none of the plants were named by Xiaojian. Bai Chong was so big and had no fruit. Moreover, the branches and leaves of many plants were covered with all kinds of terrifying thorns. You can see that it is not a good stubble. Can plant roots be dug up and eaten? But it is possible. The premise is whether Xiaojian dares to gamble with his life. He dug something out of the black, bubbling, foul-smelling silt and stuffed it into his mouth. Just thinking about it, Xiaojian's hair stood on end. A gust of cold wind blew through, and the branches and leaves above the head made a rustling sound. Xiaojian, who was still wearing early winter clothes, couldn't help but feel a chill. Along the main road where the shards of sand and glass were deposited, he walked about several hundred meters deep and shallow. Xiaojian was parked on the side of the street, and the window of a car that was not badly damaged stopped. The car door was closed tightly, some dark brown vines had climbed on it, and a thin layer of dust had accumulated on the window glass. Maybe it had been some time, and the dust was a little damp. Standing outside and looking inside, although it's a bit blurry, you can still see a headless corpse sitting on the driver's seat. Taking 2 steps back, Xiaojian raised the iron spear in his hand and slammed it down. Bang dang! The window glass shattered. There was a pungent stench in the carriage. Luckily, the corpse was wearing a stylish black leather jacket. Although Xiaojian did a lot of unethical things about picking things in graves during the time he was wandering as a child, this was really the first time he had picked clothes from a corpse that was rotting to such an extent. Xiaojian secretly confessed his guilt. There is nothing to pay attention to in extraordinary times. But soon he faced a difficult choice: what to do with the pants? Bitter Melon had a face. Xiaojian guiltily glanced at Xiaojian, who was a bit aggrieved by the cold under him, and then thought about the disgusting appearance of his jeans once covered with evil maggots. Did he really wear them like this? If something happened, just thinking about the consequences would be enough to make him shudder. Fortunately, Xiaojian suddenly found a package in the back seat www.mtlnovel.com which seemed to contain clothes. Hey, what are you really thinking about? At the moment, Xiaojian was not polite. He picked up a stick, knocked on the car window, and poured out all the clothes inside the package. Jeans, leather boots, cardigans, down jackets. The short-lived ghost in the driver's seat was well prepared, which was not easy. You must know that this is the Shenzhen, Hong Kong city, where the 4 seasons are like spring, and his thickest clothes are only a few autumn clothes. He didn't say anything. He put on jeans and leather boots. Xiaojian jumped on the spot. Yes, he has enough food and clothing. Now let's solve the problem of keeping warm first. After finishing all this, Xiaojian took a look inside the carriage with a bit of luck in his heart. Okay. Xiaojian's originally slightly wrinkled eyebrows suddenly rose up, and a surprise flashed in his deep pupils: canned food. Xiaojian actually saw 2 cans of canned food under the back seat of the car. This is really a pleasant surprise. If it was replaced with other unpackaged food, Xiaojian really did not dare to risk food poisoning to fight, but this canned food seems to have a long shelf life. I have eaten all the moldy bread, and I can eat some canned food myself, there should be no problem. Climbing into the car with both hands and feet, pried open a can, sniffed it. It was quite fragrant, and then it was easy to do, no matter the taste. It took a long time to control the amount. Just grab a handful he devoured himself. His mouth clacked, his eyes were not idle. He slid around in the carriage with his head down, hoping to pick up a few tins of pies from the sky. For those of you who think this book is passable, please click on the collection in the upper left corner. I would like to thank you for this. Danger always comes when you are most relaxed. Xiaojian, who was busy gorging himself on food, never thought that the moment he opened the can, the tempting fragrance in the can spread out in the vicinity, and after only a few breaths, a piece of grass swayed in a distance in the distance. Circles of tiny invisible ripples. The ripples spread quickly in the grass, but it was as light as a gentle breeze blowing by, the ripples on the sea. But at this time, if you look down from the air, you can see that at the very core of ripples, a straight grass line is approaching where Xiaojian is at a lightning speed. At the same time, Xiaojian, who was bending over, lying on the back seat, craned his neck and stared at the bottom of the chair, suddenly stopped chewing in his mouth, and there was a flash of sternness in his eyes. When he was a child he stole so many chickens, slaughtered so many dogs, and made so many worthless transactions, but he was not just talking about it, at least it made him more alert than ordinary people. But at this time, the grass line was already 10 meters away from the car. The attack came very suddenly and was extremely fast. I saw the grass explode violently, and a black shadow seemed to be transformed from a black arrow and shot out of the grass. The target was Xiaojian, who had just sat upright in the carriage. At this moment, Xiaojian brought out the skills he had acquired while stealing chickens and dogs and peeking at girls taking a bath on weekdays. He didn't even waste time to see what was attacking him. but instinctively smashed the can in the direction of the wind. At the same time, his legs quickly began to charge up, and he slammed the door of the car, fighting the danger of being injured. His whole body was like a cannonball, slamming through the door, and got out of the car at the first time. After discovering the crisis, Xiaojian made the right choice in the shortest possible time. It sounds mysterious, but this series of actions is really just Xiaojian's instinctive reaction. In fact, he was forced. If he didn't practice this ability to escape, it is estimated that he would have been caught by those rude elders in the village. They were tortured and killed. Squeak! Xiaojian landed, and a fish bounced off the ground neatly, and then he heard a loud scream behind him. He was sure that the cans he threw out did not hit the target. But why does this cry sound? And this sound is very familiar. Mouse. With a bit of surprise, Xiaojian observed the creature that attacked him this time. A fluffy body, dark and shiny fur, a pointed head, a slender tail. If you don't see it, you don't know. It turned out that the one who attacked him was really a mouse. It's just that this mouse's incisors are very large, and there are more than a dozen small sharp teeth neatly arranged on both sides of the triangular cheeks, exuding blood light, and the two bulging eyes are the size of a thumb, probing from the tips of the toes. The sharp claws that came out were like sharp knives, and the size of this mouse was a little bit bigger, probably not much smaller than an ordinary house cat, no less than 5 pounds. Although he was surprised, Xiaojian didn't think it was incredible. At least when he was digging through the garbage, he had seen mice that were bigger than this. At this time, the mouse was grabbing the can with a pair of front paws, and its sharp mouth kept digging into the can, and because it ate too quickly, its entire mouth was cut by the tin of the can. That cry was made because of the pain. My dear, what did this pimple eat? It grows so big. Naturally, no one can answer this question. But just by looking at the size of this mouse and the way it rushed out, I knew it would definitely not be a vegetarian. After the severely overweight rat finished eating the canned fish, he quickly set his next target at Xiaojian. With a slight jump of its short limbs, its seemingly cumbersome body was extremely light, and it landed firmly on the roof of the car. The short limbs squatted slightly, posing an attacking stance, and its pointed mouth full of blood was open. The big one kept making a low roar of hiss, and a pair of blood-red eyeballs even resisted Xiaojian, exuding a chilling bloodthirsty light. It seems that this mouse has evolved into a qualified hunter. It already knows how to put pressure on the prey it chooses, look for loopholes, and then wait for opportunities to attack. Damn it, I still play psychological tactics, thinking that if you grow stronger, I will be afraid of you. Xiaojian smiled, not to mention a mouse, even the wolf dogs in the village next door, he didn't slaughter less to eat hot pot when he was a child. He moved a few times calmly, and at the same time secretly adjusted his hand. The direction of the spear inside. Without any warning, I saw a black mang suddenly passing by, causing a sharp sound of breaking through the air, and stabbing the giant mouse on the roof like lightning. Xiaojian has already made the first move, and decisively launched an attack. The sudden attack suddenly caught the giant mouse by surprise. Its simple thinking power couldn't be converted. With its mouth open, the blunt and bald front end of the steel bar was inserted into his mouth full of fangs quickly and accurately. The hard stick-mounted metal instant barrel pierced the soft throat, shredded the organ system, and drilled from the grey-white fur between the two hind legs. The bright red gushed out of the giant rat's body and flowed down the rebar. The giant rat's stubby and sharp claws were scratching freely in the air. However, Xiaojian ignored it, put the steel bar to his mouth, raised his head and drank it. Now that the bird can fade out from his mouth, it is naturally impossible to let go of this rare delicacy. As for this mouse, will there be any problem after eating it? Go to his female horse. If you can't even eat meat, you might as well just die like that. Gyulong. Gyulong. Adam's apple rolls up and down. The warm blood plasma with a disgusting and foul smell and the fishy sweetness was swallowed straight down the throat, and an indescribable joy spread all over the limbs and bones in an instant. After a while, when the blood from the mouse's wound gradually dried up, Xiaojian wiped the remaining blood stains on the corners of his mouth, closed his eyes slightly. www.mtlnovel.com took a deep breath, and exclaimed, "It's really cool. Even if Ru Mao drank blood, it was the same," but for Xiaojian, who had been on the verge of starvation and death all the year round, it was normal. At this time, he even thought secretly in his heart, such a fat game, is it sliced? Or trouble to get a barbecue? But before he could pay attention, there was a sudden tingling pain on the outside of his right thigh. It felt like being pricked by a needle. Looking at it in astonishment, Xiaojian's pupils shrank suddenly. He actually saw the mouse hanging on his side, pierced with mutton skewers but not yet dead, and pinning the slender tail of its tail on his thigh. What made Xiaojian even more horrified was that the mouse's fluffy tail had become translucent at some point, and between the extremely rhythmic bulging, an inexplicable thing could be faintly injected into him. Inside the body. Fuck! Xiaojian's heart trembled, and he instantly had a bad feeling. Sure enough, before he could pull out the mouse's tail stuck in his thigh, his body suddenly trembled, and then Xiaojian realized that his body was no longer in control, and a numbness quickly spread throughout his body. The eyelids are getting heavier and the mind is getting blurry. No way! In less than 5 seconds, Xiaojian's eyes darkened, and he fainted again. But at the last moment of the coma, Xiaojian seemed to have received an inexplicable message in his mind. It was also at this moment that the large mouse, which was dressed into a mutton skewer, completely dropped its frantically twitching limbs, and the strangely transparent tail also fell off its butt. In the desert, the wind whistled, the sand and fog danced wildly, and on the distant sand dunes, a mysterious figure walked slowly and alone. He was wearing a black hooded trench coat, and the whole person was hidden in the black coat and hat. He carried a ferocious black giant sword as tall as a person on his back, and his steps were steady. Wherever he went, it seemed that even the light was dimmed a little, and there were countless ghosts and ghosts roaring around him. Finally, he stopped on a dune. Turn the angle of view. On the opposite side of this soldier, there are several large army formations that are neatly arranged and terrifying in number. Dark armor with a cold luster, sharp weapons exuding an aura of death, hoofs restlessly digging into the ground, mounts that snorted constantly, and all kinds of beasts and ferocious birds exuding a prehistoric aura. The entire army was so orderly that even the roaring desert seemed to be forced to crawl under their monstrous killing intent. The mysterious warrior slowly took the giant sword from his back. The army sent out various orders intermittently, and fierce beasts howled one after another. The next moment, the two opposing sides moved at the same time, and the tiny black sand grains and the huge torrent of killing charged towards each other at almost the same time. The sword chi was horizontal and vertical, and the two sides slammed into each other. The wind suddenly stopped. Under the blood-colored setting sun, limbs and arms were broken everywhere, corpses piled up like mountains, and the desert turned into an endless sea of blood. The screen freezes at this moment. The blood that covered the sky and the sun slowly faded, and all the perspectives finally focused on a small point, and then quickly zoomed in. It was a corpse, the corpse of that mysterious warrior. A gust of wind blew, and the black hood on the mysterious warrior's head was blown aside. In the dark and narrow space, there was a sudden burst of violent gasping. Opening his eyes abruptly, Xiaojian straightened his body and sat up like a conditioned reflex. Fuck! Xiaojian patted his chest with lingering fears, and felt a sense of fear in his heart for no reason. Mountains of corpses and seas of blood, mysterious warriors with terrifying force, and that familiar face. Fortunately, it was just a dream. Xiaojian held his forehead, but found that his hair was soaked with sweat. I have to say that this dream is really too real, especially when Xiaojian saw his face and his eyes wide open angrily looking at the sky, his soul almost came out of fright. Wait, What's going on? Just in time, Xiaojian suddenly realized that there seemed to be something more in his mind, and he beat his head heavily. Not long after, an inexplicable message suddenly popped out of his mind. Opening the warrior heritage. Opening warrior inheritance. Xiaojian's head was full of question marks. Is this something magical? When did it come to my mind? Xiaojian pondered for a long time, but couldn't get to the point. Instead, he made a mess in his mind and turned it into a big mess. He could only rub his temples, not thinking about it for the time being. In fact, thinking about it, Xiaojian felt that he was really bad enough. First, he was knocked unconscious by a certain mystery until now. He has not figured out how long the dizziness passed out, and finally woke up. As soon as he opened his eyes, he touched to a madman trying to kill himself. Next, I encountered a perverted mouse. Your mouse has taken hormones, so it doesn't matter if it grows so big, at least it is still within the range of human understanding, but what Xiaojian can't accept is that the mouse can still make hidden weapons, like scorpions, will give people needles, and as a result, their minds are not fully awake, and they are put in again. With this half-day's lesson, Xiaojian can also figure it out, the outside world is too dangerous now, and he will still be safe in the future. Right, what is this place? After finally getting more comfortable, Xiaojian finally realized that something was wrong with the surrounding environment. This was not the place where he fought that perverted mouse at all. The small room of about 10 square meters was very dimly lit. The only light source was from a pile of bonfires that were about to go out in the center of the room. The whole room was empty, except for some clutter scattered in the corners. No windows. The only entrance and exit is on the opposite side. One of the 4-4 method exits is just enough for one person to pass through. The iron door above is the kind with a round handle, and it is very rusted. If you guess correctly, this should also be a basement, but it is still not possible to judge the purpose of this basement. Xiaojian pounded his head heavily, trying to figure out what happened, but unfortunately he only remembered that he was finally stabbed by a mouse, and the blood-red flesh tube was still vivid in his mind. After resting for a while, Xiaojian moved his body and felt that there was nothing serious, but there was still softness on his body, a little feeling of being unable to exert himself, and the numbness on the outside of his thigh. Looking down at her thighs, Xiaojian found that his pants had been taken off, and the jeans were thrown on the ground at will. The outside of his thigh, where the mouse's tail had pierced, had swollen up about the size of a slap. www.mtlnovel.com in the middle, a cross knife was cut by a sharp tool, and there was still residue on it, with some powder of unknown composition. The wound should have been treated simply by someone. If there is no accident, the reason for saving him should be a kind-hearted survivor. Of course, it cannot be ruled out that the survivor raised him in captivity as food. It's the end of the world, and this kind of scene doesn't often appear in novels. With a position in his heart, Xiaojian lay down on the spot again. The bonfire in the middle is still burning quite vigorously for the time being. Judging from this, the owner of this basement should not have left very far, so he is not sure when he will come back. An identity to reach each other. Another 10 minutes passed. There was a series of rustling sounds at the entrance, and the circular handle was slowly turning. The owner of this basement has returned. After thinking about it, Xiaojian still closed his eyes and planned to continue pretending to be asleep. It's not a big mistake to be careful. Before he knew the identity and purpose of the other party, he decided to observe it first. Soon, the iron cover of the entrance was opened from the outside. A figure stooped and climbed in. He was wearing a black hooded cloak, and his whole body was hidden under the black cloak. Let alone his identity, he couldn't even tell whether he was a man or a woman. After he came in, he first glanced in the direction of Xiaojian, as if to confirm whether Xiaojian was awake, then walked directly in front of the bonfire, turned his back to Xiaojian, and slowly squatted down. The room fell silent for a while, as if nothing had happened. Xiaojian squinted and lay in the corner pretending to sleep, taking the opportunity to secretly look at the man in black, while the man in black turned his back to him and sat quietly by the fire, filling in a few sticks from time to time. Wood. This situation has continued. The orange flames flickered, and with the sound of crackling and sparks splashing from time to time, the dim basement gradually lit up. Xiaojian slightly wrinkled his nose. I don't know when it started, but an alluring aroma of barbecued meat gradually appeared in the basement. Xiaojian, who smelled the fragrance, finally couldn't put it on anymore. Gyulong. The silence in the basement was suddenly broken by a series of very discordant abdominal sounds. Xiaojian smiled bitterly, but had no choice but to open his eyes. At the same time, at this moment, the lines on his face that were originally a little stiff began to change sharply, and quickly softened. In the blink of an eye, he changed from an old Liuza to a well-behaved student. Hey hey! Xiaojian sat up with a childish smirk, scratching the back of his head. You're awake! The man in black didn't look back, let alone stand up. Although she had deliberately lowered her voice, it didn't prevent Xiaojian from hearing from her voice that she was a woman. This caused him to lose his mind for a moment, but he quickly adjusted. Well, thank you for saving me. It doesn't matter. The woman in black still had a lukewarm tone, but she didn't know what was going on. Xiaojian always felt that there was something inexplicable in it, as if all these little tricks he played were seen through by this woman. In just such a short time, the aroma of barbecued meat in the room became stronger and stronger. Gulong long. Xiaojian's stomach began to protest again. Regarding this disobedient stomach, Xiaojian really had no choice but to touch the back of his head embarrassingly, and kept making a silly laugh of hee hee hee. And this scene was seen by the woman who just turned around. She couldn't help but let out a chuckle. Not to mention, when this woman laughed, her voice was really nice, charming, soft, almost made Xiaojian's bones brittle. Hey hey! Xiaojian scratched his head and smirked, but he secretly said that he was very dangerous, and he almost revealed the truth. This is for you. The woman picked out a black mass from the ashes and threw it to Xiaojian from a distance. For me? What about you? Smelling the enticing aroma on it, Xiaojian couldn't help but glance at the woman suspiciously because it was supposed to be a piece of barbecue. Okay. The woman in black quickly picked out another piece from the fire. I still have. Thanks. Xiaojian was not polite, regardless of the temperature on it. He was so embarrassed that he held it in his hand and ate it. You don't need to thank me, you are very good to be able to kill this mouse alone. The woman in black returned to her previous cool look, and even when she praised herself, her voice was indifferent. Oh! Xiaojian nodded shyly, his vanity slightly inflated. Introduce myself, my name is Xiaojian, nice to meet you. Xiaoling. Oh! Xiaoling, are you alone here? Xiaojian tentatively asked a rather taboo question. It's a pity that Xiaoling responded silently, and Xiaojian asked himself for nothing. Next, no matter what Xiaojian said, Xiaoling just buried himself in the meat. After a few tries, Xiaojian had no choice but to give up. It seems that he thought it was too simple. The people who came down, and a few are simple. The room was quiet for a while. After another 10 minutes, Xiaoling finally wiped out the barbecued meat in her hands, rubbed her greasy palms on the hay under her buttocks at will, glanced at Xiaojian, and said, "Take a rest, and go out to look for it in the morning." Food. After finishing speaking, she got down and stood up, walked to a pile of hay under the corner opposite Xiaojian, and lay down with her clothes on. Before going to bed, she did not forget to take a pendant from her neck and kissed it, looking very sincere. The woman opposite Xiaoling made a simple subconscious action, but Xiaojian was suddenly startled. Jade pendant. He suddenly remembered that he seemed to have forgotten something. After pondering for a while, Xiaojian finally remembered that before he fell into a coma, on the day he was just expelled from school, his cheap old brother seemed to have sent him a jade pendant. That's right, it was the jade pendant, and that game. Unfortunately, after waking up, the accident kept happening, and I didn't remember it for a while. Xiaojian subconsciously touched the necklace on his neck, groped down the warm necklace, and went all the way around the necklace. No, why did the pendant disappear? But the chain didn't break. How could the jade pendant strung on the chain disappear for no reason? Xiaojian hurriedly took the chain off his neck, but the chain was bare, there really was nothing. Realizing that something was a little strange, Xiaojian hurriedly unbuttoned his clothes again, wanting to look in his clothes, but when Xiaojian saw his chest, he couldn't take his eyes off. The dragon totem carving on the back of the jade pendant was embedded in the skin of his chest, like a tattoo. What's the situation? Xiaojian suspected that he was dazzling. www.mtlnovel.com. He couldn't help but stretched out his fingers and wanted to touch. But when the familiar touch came from his fingertips, his brain boomed, as if it suddenly exploded, and then countless inexplicable knowledge, information, countless pictures of war and killing, in the form of explosions, abruptly was poured into his mind. All the information pictures were finally frozen in one scene under the setting sun, in the sea of blood. A soldier with bruises and bruises lay there, with his eyes open angrily, looking at the sky unwillingly. Dream. It was the dream just now. Xiaojian was completely shocked. These familiar pictures were all the same as those that appeared in his previous dreams. His consciousness gradually returned to reality, but Xiaojian felt as if a century had passed, and his whole body was full of exhaustion. A piece of inexplicable information seemed to be forced into his mind, messy, and he wanted to see clearly. But he couldn't see clearly, wanted to refuse, but kept popping out, making him feel like his head was about to explode. Are you okay? A cold voice pulled him back from the chaos. It was Xiaoling. She noticed Xiaojian was different. No, nothing. Xiaojian wiped the sweat off his forehead, and his whole person was a little lost. Go to bed early if you have nothing to do. Oh. With a mechanical response, Xiaojian lay down and slowly closed his eyes. The next moment, a message appeared very clearly in his mind. Name, Xiaojian. Occupation, warrior. The conditions are met, the simulator starts, and the auxiliary training system starts.